The Look of Silence di Joshua Oppenheimer è il documentario che concorre per il Leone d'Oro alla 71esima edizione del Festival del Cinema di Venezia. Abbiamo incontrato il regista per farci raccontare i rischi e l'esperienza vissuta per mettere in scena la storia scioccante delle vittime indonesiane del genocidio del 1965.
Tahu masyarakat sini kalau Bapak sebagai komando aksi?
Tahu orang.
It's the story that I first went to Indonesia in a way to tell, just what it's like for the survivors to have to build a life in the haunted silence, in the space haunted, in the rubble, in the aftermath of the genocide, and in this terrible space haunted by the still powerful perpetrators. What does it mean for survivors not even to be able to publicly grieve or mourn their loss and instead have to live in this silence? Only when I began that process, the army stopped us from shooting back in 2003. The survivors then suggested I film the perpetrators and then suggested I continue. With the perpetrators, I found the way of exposing, in a way, a national lie, the way a whole country has been built on the basis of terror and lies and what that means for Indonesia, but also for all of us as human beings. But then I was determined always to go back and show what is it like for survivors to have to live in the aftermath of atrocity when there's complete impunity.
Bukan kita juga.
Kan Bapak yang bertanggung jawab karena Bapak sebagai ketua komando aksi pada waktu itu.
Komando aksi ini banyak. Bukan satu aja komando aksi ini.
Ya, tapi Bapak kan ketua umum waktu itu kan? Ketua umum komando aksi.
Komando aksi ini sudah rakyat bersama ABRI. Dan ini masih ada atasan. Dan ini dilindungi oleh pemerintah. Kan itu.
There was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa because the apartheid regime fell. Here the perpetrators are still in power. So the perpetrators will not admit what they've done was wrong. First, because they're afraid of revenge. They're afraid of losing power. And also, they're afraid of their own guilt. They're afraid of having to live with themselves, knowing that they're mass murderers. But you cannot have healing, and you cannot have truth or reconciliation until the perpetrators acknowledge what they've done is wrong, which is precisely why Adi's process, while being an inspiration for all of us, inevitably fails and ends in disappointment, because you cannot have a one-person truth and reconciliation process. You need somehow a collective political process. I also learned making this film that we must not come away from atrocity and cling to optimism, cling to the notion that, look away from atrocity by telling ourselves that justice will prevail when we have really no evidence that it will. We have to stop and honor the dead and look at listen to the silence that follows in the aftermath of mass murder and acknowledge the lives that have been destroyed, the dead that can never be wakened, the brokenness that can never be made whole again, and stop and look backwards in memoriam to what we as human beings destroy when we commit political violence.
Jadi kalau Adi bilang, saya bertanggung jawab, jauh kali itu.
Setiap beberapa orang pembunuh itu yang saya jumpain, mereka tidak merasa bertanggung jawab.
Making this film was in fact much more frightening than making The Act of Killing. Actually, The Act of Killing was emotionally frightening. It was incredibly painful. It was very hard. It led to nightmares and insomnia and was difficult. But this film, we were really fearing for our safety. We would shoot these scenes, these confrontation scenes with the powerful perpetrators with only my Danish crew, no Indonesian crew, with mobile phones that had all the data erased from it in our pockets so that no one would be able to find our friends or track down our Indonesian crew. Adi would go with no ID. We would go with 2 cars so that it'd be easier to make a getaway and not be followed. If we had to run away with our bags packed, we were afraid making this film. If we want to have ethical relationships with Indonesia going forward, we have to acknowledge our role in these crimes. We have to fully declassify the details of how we helped commit these crimes. We know that we provided weapons and lists of names of people to be killed. The American government gave lists of thousands of people's names to the Indonesian army saying, tick off these names when you've killed them and give the lists back to us, death lists. We know that. But so much we don't know. Most of the documents are declassified, and it's very important that the US government, the British government, the Australian government, the Japanese government, the Dutch government possibly even the Italian government, I don't know, declassify whatever information exists about what we did and apologize for it, acknowledge it, and say categorically, this was wrong, we helped participate in mass murder.
Lewat-lewat iku pun dek petuk pun aku dek pun gak negara kok mau buan ciku setengah mati. Benci aku.